I'm Joshua Henson. My thesis is titled Nudges from Abroad, Investigating America's Vulnerability to Foreign Choice Architecture. About a year and a half ago, I got interested in the nexus of technology and democracy. And I also, at the same time, I became fascinated by the homeland implications of China's digital authoritarianism. And this thesis grew up out of that rabbit hole, out of that confluence of factors. And the basic research question that I looked into is this: how could a near-peer competitor like China use technology to nudge Americans away from democracy? The answers to that question live in the junction of AI data surveillance technology, choice architecture, and democratic resilience. First, AI data surveillance is pervasive and it's growing. It's becoming impossible to maintain privacy or anonymity if you interact with the internet in almost any way, and that grows truer every hour. Most of the time, this data that we give to internet companies about ourselves, it's used to market goods and services. It's used to make money, basically. But what if these AI-generated profiles were used to individually target us for viewpoint manipulation? Second, choice architecture is a way of influencing what people do by artificially structuring their apparent choices. Put simply, it's manipulation. Governments, marketers, public health folks even, they've been using these techniques for years. But what AI and data capture tech are doing is they're now turbocharging choice architecture by creating feedback loops that nudge, they evaluate, they nudge again, sometimes almost imperceptibly in a process that's called a hypernudge. Some privacy advocates warn that companies like Google are using these hypernudges to usurp people's autonomy when they make decisions. Finally, democratic resilience is fragile, both in the United States and abroad. For just one example, the United States just had a series of elections where threats and violence followed polarization and populism. So you mash these three things together and you get a wicked problem. What if an adversary intentionally applied this confluence of factors to try to weaken or end America's democratic leadership? To answer these questions and evaluate the risk, I looked to the future. The problem I face is that as an engineer and as a manager, I'm accustomed to quantifying risk. I wasn't really sure how to quantify this complex of a problem space. With some guidance, I discovered a technique called future scenario planning. What future scenario planning is, it's a technique that embraces uncertainty instead of fighting against it. The goal isn't to mathematically predict what the future is going to be or even which future is most likely. The goal is to instead identify what the future could be. And then you take those futures and you tell stories, fictional narratives, that set the audience in those plausible futures so that they can really figure out what it would look like if they were to live in them. So using this technique, I evaluated three scenarios, all set around the 2032 federal election in the United States. They're built on three critical variables that are arranged into a three-axis volume, defining a space in which they all coexist. The first variable asks how effectively near-future technology could change minds and alter behavior. The second evaluates the range of China's future capability and their determination to use that technology. And the third looks at the resilience of democracy in the United States. The three scenarios that came from this include a status quo case, a truly frightening worst case, and a somewhat better case. The status quo case follows a media influencer. He and his employer experience a series of manipulations that are meant to silence his message. He's attacked by AI internet trolls, and some other social media AI attempt to drown him out by promoting alternative content. His employer, separately, is obliquely threatened with business consequences. And finally, he and his employer both suffer from a lowered social credit score. Social credit scoring is a system that China is trying to create, and it's kind of like the American FICO score on steroids. It looks not only at financial reliability like FICO does, but it also looks at social and ideological reliability as well. The consequences of a low score can make living or doing business in China extremely difficult. So the next scenario is a worst case. This scenario follows a young woman targeted by AI for radicalization on social media. A version of the hypernudging process I described earlier eventually drives her to violence during a federal election, but the twist is that she and her merry band of domestic extremists are not alone. The AI-targeted radicalization process is played out tens of thousands of times across the United States over several years, and the result is targeted attacks on election infrastructure, and the scenario ends with democratic catastrophe. No possible way of knowing who won the presidency or majorities in Congress, and no physical way to reconstruct the actual vote in several jurisdictions. The final scenario is a better case. In it, a businessman who bears a strikingly coincidental resemblance to a much wiser Elon Musk purchases a social media company and is pressured by the Chinese government to turn over his user identity profiles. Instead, he joins with other leaders, both in tech and in government, to teach people how to be savvier media consumers. These scenarios generated a few conclusions. First, data surveillance is a threat to democracy. This is especially true when they are supercharged by emerging AI and machine learning tools that detect connections that humans can miss. 2, a near-peer adversary like China doesn't necessarily need technology like data surveillance to influence Americans, but when it is used, technology can supercharge the effectiveness of attacks that already exist. 3, American corporations have a fiduciary duty to maximize their shareholder profit, but they lack a clear countervailing duty to defend the democratic principles that allow them to thrive. This presents a weakness in modern capitalist democracies. 4th, online stimuli can provoke offline actions. And 5th, American elections are as susceptible to physical assault as they are to ideological assault. From these conclusions spring the following recommendations. First, educate Americans to be savvier media consumers. Don't consider it something that stops in school. Technology just moves too fast for that. Use tools like gamification and adult teaching methods to make people smarter about how they internalize media messages. Second, regulate how personal data is captured, stored, used, and shared. The data surveillance is growing too complete, too pervasive to control. Place controls on it now. Europe and some United States have taken a crack at legal frameworks for this, but technology often moves faster than the law. Build a global standards organization that invites government, business, and advocates to set global standards and then maintain those standards. Third, continue to invest in American artificial intelligence development. Don't stop at the basic science, the theoretical stuff. Research how it can be used, how it can be operationalized. The more we understand AI and machine learning, the more prepared we are for when it is used in harmful or dangerous ways. And finally, continue American leadership in democracy. This starts at home by shoring up democratic norms that have been slipping. Gerrymandering, political fragmentation, polarization, they are not inevitable. Fight against them, and in so doing, ensure our democratic resiliency against attacks like those that are envisioned here. Thank you.